Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about supersized vehicles, supersized safety risk. I'm Valerie Smith, and I am the Director of Road Safety Programs at Parachute Canada. We've coordinated this panel hand in hand with Piétons Québec and Équiterre. Just for some context, last year, Parachute and CARSP formed a coalition focused primarily on supporting the Global Decade of Action for Road Safety 2021 to 2030, and the priorities put forward in the global plan. Our objective was to work with national organizations that focused on active transport and mobility, sustainability and climate action, physical and mental health, and equity. All agendas with cross-cutting themes for road safety. Some of our coalition members include 880 Cities, Traffic Injury Research Foundation, Équiterre, Piétons Québec, Participation, Green Communities Canada, Velo Canada Bikes, Canadian Urban Transit Association, and TCAT. So as a coalition, we developed a preliminary list of 3 priorities to help support the Global Decade of Action for Road Safety 2021 to 2030. These include safe speed, playing a positive influence on the development of Canada's next National Road Safety Strategy, and safe vehicles. So today's webinar is a result of collaboration within that coalition. I'd like to thank our national sponsors and longtime partners, Desjardins Insurance. And now I'd like to introduce our moderator, Francis Garnier. He is a public affairs analyst at Piétons Québec, advocating for pedestrian road safety and transit funding in Quebec, and he's based in Montreal. So over to you, Francis.
Thank you very much, Valérie, for those opening remarks, and thank you everyone for being here today. I'm very glad that we're all gathered to talk about a very important topic, everyone's safety, especially our road safety. Before we begin, I'll just bring your attention to the Q&A tool at the bottom of your Zoom screen. That's where you'll be invited to ask your questions, or our panelists will try to answer it during the webinar, but we also have a 15-minute period at the very end of the webinar to answer them in front of everyone. As a little side note before we begin, we might refer to SUVs and pickup trucks as light trucks or small trucks sometimes, but we always mean and talk about really SUVs and pickup trucks. Some definitions can also include vans stuff, but we're really targeting the first 2 categories. Depending on your background and your horizons, you might have heard already that there's an increased risk associated with SUVs and pickup trucks to the road safety, especially to pedestrians. Many studies will find that there is an increased danger and increased mortality rate when the collision happens. That can be twice or even sometimes 3 times the regular mortality rate with a car. And that rate can be even higher if we're talking about children or elderly. So our first 2 participants, they're all going to share their findings regarding the effect of the front end height and the difference in visibility that's associated with the light trucks. We're then going to follow the first period with a roundtable discussion between the NGOs, which will then be over with the question period. So without further ado, I'm thrilled to announce Sam Monfort, that's a Senior Statistician from the IIHS, also known as the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety. He's joining us from Washington, I believe.
Near Charlottesville, actually, Central Virginia.
Central Virginia, not quite, but close. Thank you.
Sure.
Sam started working at the IIHS in 2018 after getting his PhD in the human factors psychology at George Mason University. His research interests include vulnerable road users, crash compatibility, and the use and misuse of automation. He's sharing today his most recent findings about the relationship between the leading edge height, or the point of contact on the front grille of a car, and with the vulnerable user safety. All yours, Sam.
All right, thank you very much. I'm happy to be here with everyone, and I'm excited to be sharing some of the work that we're doing at the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety. Like Francis said, I'm a statistician here, and I'm here to talk about vehicle front end size and shape, and this is something that we're all eager to get a better handle on. And so I hope that we can do that here together today. Just briefly, though, for those of you who haven't heard of the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, our goal collectively is to reduce deaths, injuries, and property damage from motor vehicle crashes. We have a variety of testing protocols that help us in this mission. We've started with the moderate overlap frontal crash test. This is just to evaluate the safety of vehicles. And we've been adding tests ever since. Most recently, we've been adding a lot of pedestrian-related tests with auto brake systems and frontal crash warning systems. So to that end, we're also doing a lot of research on pedestrian fatalities. And we've been seeing a large increase in the number of these crashes in the United States over the last 10 years. And so a lot of my work recently has been related to untangling that. So one of the changes we've been seeing that we've suspected is related to this increase is a change in our fleet composition. So SUVs are now the most common type of vehicle in the United States, most common type of passenger vehicle. And cars, especially small ones, are growing increasingly rare. So to put a number on it, over the last 30 years, the average passenger vehicle in the United States has gotten about 4 inches wider, 10 inches longer, 8 inches taller, and 1,000 pounds heavier. These changes, among many others, have encouraged us to really dive into the data and try to figure out what's going on here, especially when it comes to size and shape and their relationship with pedestrian crash outcomes. The data that I'm going to present to you today comes from the Vulnerable Road User Injury Prevention Alliance, or VIPA for short. They maintain this excellent database of crashes containing detailed examinations of police reports, scene information, and medical records. After each crash, a panel of experts reconstructs the cases using a simulation and then links every single hospital recorded injury to a component on the striking vehicle. So this is a very granular data set that lets us answer very granular research questions. For this, we had 121 single vehicle, single pedestrian crashes that occurred between 2015 and 2021. So we devised a measurement program that I'm depicting here and used it to measure each vehicle involved in the crash data set. So for this presentation, I'm going to be focusing on 2 of those measures that are highlighted in blue. These are the ones, honestly, that we went into this suspecting would be the most important and ended up being the most predictive of the various pedestrian injury outcomes. So we have the leading edge height, so basically the point where the front end transitions to the top of the vehicle. And then we have the angle of the bumper. So some vehicles, it's more sloped, and for some vehicles, it's more blunt. Just to demonstrate what I mean by that, I've split these into 2 categories, and this is how we did it in the study, in 2 categories. And you can see we have short and sloped, short and blunt, tall and sloped, and tall and blunt. And I'm sure that many of you have seen examples of these vehicles on the roads. Perhaps more recently, you've seen a lot of tall and blunt ones, like myself, which was part of the justification for doing this study for us. So to preface the results a little bit, I'd like to go into the injury outcomes we recorded. So we have 2 different kinds. We have AIS scores. These represent the injury severity to a single body region. So, the leg, the arm, the head, the chest, and so on. These range from 1 to 6. And then as a sort of summary score for the whole body, we have the ISS scores, injury severity scores. And these represent, like I said, just the overall severity. And they are the squared sum of the 3 highest AIS values. So that's a little bit of a mouthful, but basically if you have an AIS-2 leg injury, an AIS-2 chest injury, and an AIS-2 head injury, that's 2 squared plus 2 squared plus 2 squared. And then this is capped at 75 when it's fatal. So cutting right to the chase, we found that tall, blunt vehicles produced 34% more severe crash injuries overall compared to the other vehicle shapes and sizes. And so the numbers involved with this 34% increase were basically the tall and blunt vehicles produced ISS scores of 26 compared to ISS scores of 19 for the other shapes. But to give you a sense of what this difference represents, I have an example of how 3 squared sums might produce those values. And what you can see is that it might be something like replacing an AIS-3 with an AIS-4 injury. Again, to put that in more concrete terms, AIS-4 injuries are substantially more likely to produce fatality compared with AIS-3s, despite just increasing by 1. So the difference that we're seeing here is pretty meaningful. So this is the overall picture of injury severity, but again, the data provided a large amount of detail. So we wanted to dive into this difference to see what might be underlying it. I'm about to show you 2 graphs. On the left is injury risk, so the chance that a pedestrian in a crash got an AIS-2 plus injury to the head, torso, various injury parts. And on the right is the severity. So given that an injury was inflicted, how severe should we expect it to be? What we observed is that the injuriousness from tall, blunt vehicles may be related to their tendency to inflict more frequent and more severe injuries to the torso and hip. So the tall, blunt vehicles are those in the solid yellow bar, and you can see that for torso and hip, they're higher than all 3 other types of vehicles for both risk and severity. We also observed a general effect for tall vehicles, so both blunt and sloped, where both of these were producing more severe head injuries on average. But the threat that a vehicle poses to a pedestrian is going to be inherently related to how tall that pedestrian is, right? A height measurement is ultimately a relative statement. Tall compared to what? Luckily, we had pedestrian height from the hospital records. And so using basically average body composition ratios, we estimated where on each pedestrian's body the leading edge of the striking vehicle hit them. And so what we saw was a clear relative height effect. So taller vehicles inflicted more frequent and severe head, torso, and hip injuries. And this height effect was dependent on being taller than the pedestrian, specifically over their hip, which past research has found to be important because it's the center of gravity. So if you're struck above your center of gravity, you'll have a very different crash outcome in terms of where you're thrown compared with if you're struck below your center of gravity. All right, so we also had information about injury attribution. And so this, like I said before, was basically what injury is caused by which component. And so we examined AIS-2 plus injuries. These are the more perhaps serious ones. They're discounting scrapes and scratches, essentially. And 90% of these came from primary impacts with the vehicle. So we're really diving down on the vehicle components themselves rather than parts of the environment. And so recall that tall vehicles produced more severe head injuries. We found that head injuries for tall vehicles most often resulted from impacts with the hood, compared with short vehicles that inflicted them with a wide variety of components, but most of them higher up, so on the windshield or on the cowl. We also found that although all vehicles caused most hip injuries with their front ends, tall ones caused 100% of them with it, whereas short vehicles had other striking components mixed in. And finally, and this is probably most relevant to the higher net injury score that we saw for these tall, blunt vehicles, we found that these tended to cause most of their torso injuries with their front ends, whereas all the other vehicle types caused torso injuries higher up on the vehicle, mostly with their hoods, which are famously a little bit more forgiving in terms of deformation than the front ends of vehicles. Right, so overall, just to sum it up, we found that the overall injury severity picture for tall, blunt vehicles was worse compared with all other types of vehicles. We also found that tall ones, independent of front end shape, were more injurious than short ones, particularly because of injuries to the head being more likely to be caused by hoods rather than the windshield or the cowl. And then we also found that tall and blunt vehicles were the most dangerous because of their injuries to torsos and hips being more severe and likely, and that these injuries were caused by front ends rather than hoods. And this, like I mentioned before, may be related to the whole center of gravity idea, that the relative height of the pedestrian in the vehicle is a key factor for head, torso, and hip injuries. And as far as where do we go from here? We're trying to figure that out ourselves, to be honest, but vehicle shape may be a key differentiator in certain injury outcomes. And so we should be paying attention to exactly which parts of the front ends are causing those injuries and maybe making changes to mitigate that. We also have been paying attention to pedestrian AEB systems. I mentioned in the beginning that we're adding a pedestrian AEB test, and these systems have been proven to be very effective at reducing crash risk and also injury risk. And so we're trying to encourage more of that. Visibility might also be a concern. In particular, it seems like the A pillar might be blocking some of the driver visibility when it comes to turning crashes. Some other studies done by my colleagues have found that SUVs, minivans, large vans, and pickup trucks are anywhere from 2 to 4 times more likely to strike pedestrians when turning at intersections. And then lastly, this is something that we haven't looked into much yet. I think it's more common in Europe, but crash attenuators for pedestrian crashes. So pop-up hoods or external airbags both could go a long way towards reducing the energy transferred to pedestrians during crashes. So a lot of ways to go with this, but it's clear that something needs to be done. And that's all I have for you. Thank you for your attention.
Well, thank you very much, Sam. Despite those numbers always being very chilling to hear and very much associated with grave concerns, you did an excellent job of presenting it in a very concise and clear way. So thank you very much for that presentation. Feel free to stick around a bit to answer the questions, both in the chat and at the end of the period. So we're now joined by, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I see a question now. Should we wait till the end or go for it?
I think we should wait till the end, Francis, just because of our timing.
Yep,
okay.
I concur. So we'll keep moving and we'll go all the questions at the end. So next up, we're joined by Dominique Charlebois, a research engineer at Transport Canada. Dominique has more than 9 years of experience at the federal organization with a special interest in visibility for both passenger vehicles and commercial heavier trucks, as well as testing assisted driving technologies like the automatic emergency braking that Sam just mentioned. We're all eager to understand better what the research and the testing is undergoing here locally in Canada. So it's all yours, Sam. Sorry, it's all yours, Dominique.
It's all good. Thanks, Francis, for the introduction. Well, I'll try to. I'm sharing the right screen now. We practiced before, but I just want to make sure you're seeing the good stuff. So
Looking
I'll
perfect.
go through. Yeah, it's all good. All right, perfect. There we go. So I just so I work at Transport Canada. I'm gonna touch base to you about present to you the research and a bit of background about where we're from, identify the problem, explore the different approaches that we have been looking at, and where are we going with this. So I just want to move here. Sorry, just this. Here we go. This screen here, perfect. So I see better my notes here. So so I just want to give you a bit of housekeeping here. For in Canada, like road safety is a shared responsibility. It's a busy slide here, but all I want to focus on is that we have the federal areas of responsibility where I'm from, and the provincial that would like look more at example driver's licensing and vehicle registration, and the municipal at moving people around and infrastructure for traffic management as an example. So I'm gonna just take a few seconds to focus on the shared responsibility from the Motor Vehicle Safety Act and Transport Canada. We apply regulation to a motor vehicle, child restraint, and tires. So for motor vehicle, it's like your crash worthiness, seat belts, braking system, for example, that would fall under a jurisdiction. And while Transport Canada works with jurisdiction, try to keep the regulation up to date. And if there's any problem or suspected issues, Transport Canada investigates and support a corrective measure by the manufacturer. So unfortunately, like we get the latest numbers from 2022. I know it's kind of a weird year, kind of transition, but from the pandemic, but we're really looking at like a record 1931 fatalities. It's the second count in the last 10 years. So serious injuries went up as compared to last year, the year before, and the total injuries went up. And the important thing is to try to understand where the causes of these injuries and fatalities are coming from, and trying to understand what's happening on Canadian roads. I mean, poor visibility could be a problem. Vehicle size or driver's distraction. I mean, there's a lot of confounding factor, and it's important to really understand where these increments are coming from. So what's my role here at Transport Canada? Well, that's a good one. Don't believe the guy on the slide here. But I mean, I'm testing some vehicles to collect evidence to inform motor vehicle safety policies and standards. That's the key. So we develop test methods for the procedures and tomorrow. I'm seeing here on the track. I'll show you a couple of pictures there. But like most of our activities are ongoing at the Motor Vehicle Test Center located in Blainville, which is North Laval. Well, it's important to assess the potential risk of new technologies and also assess the potential benefit of technology. Really important. I just want to touch quickly on research background. I mean, we've been looking at advanced technologies in vehicles for at Transport Canada, I would say for more than 12 years. So I just want to like show a bit of the recent publications or research topics that fall aligned with the size of the vehicle and what we've been looking at. So kind of like starting a bit of publication in 2018 from the Canadian Council of Motor Transportation Administrator that came out with some safety measure for cyclists and pedestrians around heavy duty vehicle. And one of the big problem is like, as you might be aware, is that, you know, like the size of the vehicle and the incumbent blind spot around it. So like in parallel, we went to the test track and acquire a bunch of technology. Most of it came from Europe to see how these systems on the track setting would detect cyclists and pedestrian. So that was published in 2019 for those of you who are interested. Along those lines, we try to use some Science and Economic Development Canada program to stimulate small and medium enterprise for coming up with cost-effective systems to add to large vehicles to help detect pedestrians and warn drivers. So that was a good project that and very interesting products that came out of there. And these systems are awareness systems, so they warn the driver. So we went out and did a field testing from west to east coast, so from Edmonton, 5 cities, Edmonton, Hamilton, Toronto, Ottawa, and Montreal, where we collected over a year and a half of feedback from drivers, operator, and getting warning systems that would help detect pedestrians in their blind zones and warn them during their operation. So like, just to touch a little bit on like the detection in the vehicle, that's coming more prominently offered in vehicles. And so in 2023, we published a lot of different scenarios that we were able to put on the track that involves the pedestrian in Canadian context, like wearing winter clothes, for example, or being tested in a group setting, like stuff that is different from the traditional, simpler test procedures. And in 2023, again, visibility systems, and we tried to develop realistic scenarios based on unfortunate events that occurred across Canada and brought that to the test track to test the latest technologies in pedestrian detection. You might have some in your vehicles like 360 cameras, and that's also something very interesting to look at. So in 2023 at AutoSense, that's in Michigan, we presented some preliminary results about like 360 view cameras where it might show the blind spots around the vehicle, but it inherently created some digital blind spots, and that's what we're trying to compare with the blind spots on the vehicle and see how it can affect the safety benefits and the safety risk to vulnerable road user. And the last on the list here on this long trendy nighttime lecture for you guys over who's watching the webinar, the research on visibility. So I just want to point out here the problem, which is like basically you're hiding in plain sight. So these big vehicles, I know they're not pickup trucks and SUV, we'll get to that, but they have an inherent similar problem, is that the way they're built or the construction of them and the sheer size, you can hide. For example, this is an adult cyclist. It can be hiding in the different spots there around the vehicle, and you can see that in bigger vehicles. So like if you see this transit bus turning left, and this is a case actually, and the pedestrian was tracked into the blind spot, so the driver couldn't see the pedestrian, because as it turned, the pedestrian was moving along with the blind spot. And so the technology, visibility, that's what we're very interested in. What others are doing? Well, that's a very good question. There are there methods out there that we can use to calculate visibility? Is there a science-based method? Can we learn from other jurisdictions? So a lot of the original equipment we purchased was from European origin, and it served to it was used over there in the UK because they came up with a procedure, a volumetric procedure to quantify direct visibility and see on large commercial vehicle, and they even went to implement like a rating system, and you needed to have a good rating in order to drive in the London center core. So this is interesting. So we want to see how this happened. One thing to point out too is that we can't do that in isolation in our own tiny silo. So we try to collaborate with other government groups that are closely tied to research, policy, but also provincial authorities that are interested in pedestrian and vulnerable road user, like the SAEQ. We have like international partner on different projects. IIHS, NHTSA, and especially like some for the visibility, some universities in the UK, and Transport Canada funds organization like Parachute to promote as well, like motor vehicle safety. So it's a very complex problem with that a lot of people are interested in, and it's important to work together to that. So I'll just do a brief overview. I'm not an expert on the UN 167 regulation of its origin, but just to make it simple, like it defines a volumetric, so the giant square on the left side of my screen, and then you derive the projection of where the driver would look at through the windshield and the side windows. And then you can derive a score. So that was very interesting. So we took some North American vehicle or Canadian vehicles that you might recognize here. I mean, this is a transport truck that could carry goods in your city or from city to another. And we applied that volumetric. So it's basically on the passenger side, you have a volume. On the driver side, you have a volume. And in the front, you also have a volume that you need to meet a certain volume to get a thumbs up or a thumbs down. So in our case here, on the driver's side, it didn't quite make the mark. I'll show you another vehicle that is kind of a flat nose, something that you would like a cab over, that is called, that you could see more in the delivery setting in your city. And for this one, on the passenger, the driver's side, it didn't pass a criteria, but in the front it did. So one attribute is like the windows are really high, and that kind of impeded on the projection volume on the side of each the driver and the passenger side. So the last one for last though, I just want to like see if you'll get this one. Like this is a kind of a large vehicle that would like tow big loads. It has a super long nose. So it's a typical, let's say, American real truck with the giant smokestack on each side, and it passed all the volumetric assessment for the regulation. So this raised a big important question as what really why. So like this like the two red trucks there are designed to serve a similar purpose, but in different jurisdiction. So ours wasn't designed with that regulation in mind. So that the criteria were not designed to let's say capture the limitation of our current fleet to improve. So that means that we need to, even if it passed the regulation, you can hide 26 fifth percentile, which would be like around a 4'11", 5 foot tall person in front of the truck where you'd have a crosswalk. So it's interesting to have a tool, but it needs to be adapted if you want to make a change on the design of vehicles. Here we go, right there in the front. So so this method is not necessarily adapted, as you can see, like for the North American vehicle. So more research is needed so we can better define that zone and better capture their safety risk elements in there. So the big question was like, can we apply a similar method to pickup trucks and large SUVs? And the answer is probably, because it's a very robust method, but we need to better define the volumetric, like the base, what we're trying to capture around. So like, for example, how far do we want to go, like maybe cover the sidewalk, etc., just to see how our pickup trucks and SUV are being used and what would be the volume would like to cover around the truck. It's a promising tool. It's labor extensive, but it's interesting. So like, just to give you an idea, using a different metric a little bit, we just said, well, what's the minimum height of the VRU that you can see? So this is a typical SUV, and from the driver perspective, if you're staring right in the front over your steering wheel, you could hide in the crosswalk in front a 3.5 to 4.5-year-old dummy. And we try to split it across here so you can see, like the B pillar, the A pillar on the passenger side is hiding partially some pedestrians in there. And if you take a pickup truck and you do the similar exercise, you can hide a 4.5 to 6.5-year-old. And you can see that this type of traditional, let's say, pickup truck has bigger mirrors, and you can partially hide this age group pedestrian. So if you get slightly a bump up pickup truck and you do the same exercise, well, you can see that the mirrors for the vocation of the vehicle, I guess, to see behind a trailer or just the sheer size of the truck, you can hide an 8 to a 9.5-year-old in front of the vehicle on the side. So it makes it an interesting projection and makes it an interesting metric. So it's something to investigate more and see how we can better quantify that. So like, it's a complex issue. Like I said, so at Transport Canada, we looked at a kind of a multi-prong approach. So we're looking at pedestrian AB aftermarket warning systems and how is this technology could be potentially effective. There's also another aspect, which is a advance in the mirrors replacing and cameras replacing mirrors, and that's something that we'd be very interested in seeing. So quickly, I'd like to just touch a little bit on the pedestrian AB. In the last 5 years, it showed promising results, like systems improve, and it can detect a pedestrian in very awkward situation. And so the next video I'm going to show you, it's been tested at our test facility, part of our program. So we're driving down the road at 40 kilometers per hour. The driver is not going to intervene. And on the right-hand side, there's someone who's going to show up at the last minute. So this is the type of testing that we're trying to see how pedestrian AB could be effective in such a situation. This is a very harsh test. It's very difficult because the pedestrian comes out at the last minute here. And so just to show you what's going on from the outside, it's basically a full-size pickup truck that was able to avoid a collision. So that improved greatly in the past few years, because before that, pedestrian detection in that scenario would reduce the risk of collision, like it would reduce the impact speed, but going up to 40 kilometers per hour and full stop and avoiding a collision is promising technology. So for smart cameras, like in this clip here, like it would broadcast like a potential risk to the driver and warning that there's a problem on the, let's say he's performing a left turn here. So we developed different scenarios that are based on accidentology, tested at night, tested cyclists with adult dummies, child dummies, and tried to see the potential benefit of this technology. And replacing mirrors with cameras, there was an STM project in Montreal. And so on the left-hand side, you can see that in the adverse weather, cameras can help like to see in adverse weather more than the mirror itself. And on the right-hand side, that's a field of view diagram. So imagine your bird's eye view. You're standing on a really, really tall ladder. So the turquoise is what you can see in the front, and the other colors are the convex and the flat mirrors that help seeing the blind spots. And the white in between is basically you don't see anything. So if you substitute the cameras, sorry, the mirrors by cameras, you can improve, increase the scope of the visibility. So all these technologies could be also like, helping people that drive a larger vehicle, or like, create some improve safety for all road users. Hope you're all still there with me. So where are we going with this? Well, we need to continue to develop projects that that understand and address the multifaceted risk of VRU with a system approach. There's a lot going on the road. There's the environment we need to take into consideration, how these vehicles are being used, and the projects that will help us better understand the risk are favorable to advancing safety. So we need to, again, support a framework for future evidence-based visibility rating. We're exploring the options, and I think we can really improve on these technologies to better scan and document vehicle and link it to accidents. So I really like the presentation before, because that's the idea, is to really link to the safety risk, how visibility can be improved. So and look at the safety benefit and the risk, as well of introducing new technologies in the field to help mitigate risk to vulnerable road users. And as your initiative today of gathering a great session to share the awareness about vehicle size and risk to vulnerable road users, foster collaboration and share results are projects that we'll focus on in the years to come. So that's all I have for today. If you have any questions, I'll stick around, but you can also send me an email.
Thank you very much, Dominique, for your presentation. I think we're all surprised to see the comparison between different type of trucks, one that we would expect to fare much better than the previous one and didn't. It shows how important and crucial the tools and how they're designed, and what we're trying to reach with them has to be very carefully crafted. And we're all very excited, I think, to see how all these findings, these methodologies will bring into possible regulations or norms in the future. Thank you very much. And please stick around for answering the questions as mentioned. So we discussed at first how it's not just about the height of the vehicle, but it's really about the shape and how where the point of collision is compared to the body, how it affects injuries. After that, we saw how I just mentioned how crucial the tools are to design, are to categorize, these the risk, and how much there's research that's required to really make sure we have robust systems. So I'd like to move on with the second part of this webinar, which is a little panel between a few NGOs. We have advocacy groups across Canada, and that have taken actions to discuss where do we go from there. We see results, we see studies are popping up, but not always regulations or even a change in mindset to accompany it. So I'm joined by Anne-Catherine, mobility analyst at Équiterre, which has been spearheading, especially here in Quebec, the campaigns to raise awareness about the heightened risk of SUVs, pickups, both from the safety point of view, but also from the environmental one, and as well as the cost. I'm also joined by Albert Cole, which is an environmental lawyer, and coordinator at the CRASH, a coalition to reduce the auto-size hazards, which is advocating for pedestrian and cycling safety, based in Toronto. So let me just first up exploit a bit my moderator privilege to start with the actions we did at Piétons Québec recently. Aside from the coalition that's been mentioned by Valérie at the beginning, we've completed recently a two-pager that summarizes both the research, but also the actions that are being taken or discussed both here and abroad. This release of this two-pager was accompanied by an op-ed letter that was signed by multiple people here, which I was asking for the different levels of government to recognize the increased risk of these bigger vehicles. We're also about to launch a campaign with the Société d'assurance automobile du Québec, or insurance safety in Quebec, if you will, to raise awareness about the blind spots caused by these A-pillars, like you saw so well in Dominique's presentation. Beyond the safe vehicle aspect, we're involved in many other categories, such as speed management, how to design intersections and safe crossings, which are all really the other aspects within Vision Zero. But I saw a question related to that in the Q&A. Just to be clear today, we are all talking and promoting Vision Zero, but we're especially addressing today the safe vehicle part of it, specifically the consumer side, not the heavy trucks and the commercial side. But of course, the other aspects are very important and have a huge influence on the crash gravity and aspects. So first up, I'd like to invite Anne-Catherine, which has been very busy on the topic for quite some years now, to share your research and the actions of Équiterre.
Thanks, Francis. Yes, in addition to our actions to promote alternatives to auto solo, at Équiterre, we decided to better understand this trend, and in order to help reverse it through research, awareness raising, and advocacy. We first led a big research project called Understanding the Rise of Light Trucks in Canada to reverse the trend. It was between 2018 and 2020, and this big research work addressed several aspects, such as the impacts of the transformation of light-duty vehicle fleet in Quebec, the definitions of light trucks and how the supply has evolved, the factors contributing to the transformation of the light-duty vehicle fleet, the consumer's motivation towards small trucks in Canada, the practices, the regulatory framework, and the recommendations regarding car advertising as well. And after this research project, so since 2021, we have been coordinating what we call the Assess What Your True Needs Are campaign in Quebec. So Équiterre mobilized influential groups such as car industry, advisory associations, sustainable mobility associations, road security and public health oriented associations, research professionals, consumer associations, and environmental organizations around the table to gain guidance on a variety of aspects related to their respective expertise. And the aim of this campaign was to raise Quebecers' awareness of the impact of light trucks on the environment, on personal finances, and on other road user safety, just as we've been talking today. So to this end, Équiterre deployed many initiatives in the field. We trained key players to integrate the notions of vehicle size into their tools, into driving school monitors and to personal budget advisors. We conduct a large-scale advertising campaign in the media to reach a very wide audience. We raised the issue in the public sphere and into the media. We inform students in university through a series of conferences on the topic. And we also developed some tools to help people assess their real needs. So we developed a comparator that allows people to see the different impacts of their choice, whether they choose a bigger or a smaller car, or electric versus a non-electric car. So yeah, that's about it. And we also have the big objective to advocate to regulate car advertising. So we had a petition which is still going on. We made a video. We made some government relations, and we launched a report a few weeks ago, comparing the history of the tobacco industry and the vehicle industry, in order to regulate the use of vehicles as we did for the tobacco in the past. And just this morning, we filed a complaint against to the Consumer Protection Office. I don't know how we call it in English, but it's an institution in Quebec, to denounce two Toyota automobile advertisement. So it's like, while it's not regulated, we are trying to put some pressure to make sure that the auto industry thinks about the way it promotes big vehicles. And for the next phase of the project, we are aiming to work on the issue on a pan-Canadian scale and even with international partners, but we are looking for funding to continue our work. So that's pretty much our work.
Thank you very much, Catherine, for this overview of Équiterre's activities. I'll circle back to you right after about the parallels between the tobacco industry and the car advertising industry. I think we're curious to hear more about that one. But first up, Albert, you've recently released a very impressive report about the topic of light trucks called Oversized. I'd like to hear more about that and other activities of Crash.
Right. Thanks very much. And thank you to Équiterre, Piétons Québec, and Parachute for bringing us together. I mean, we know that to get change on this issue, we're fighting some pretty strong groups, such as the auto industry. And without a broad community mobilization in Canada and the US and even beyond, we're not going to be able to get the changes that we need. So in 2022, we brought together a coalition of road safety, cycling, and climate groups across Ontario to go to the Ontario Chief Coroner to ask him to review the danger. We were very pleased to hear that the coroner didn't dispute what we were saying at all. In other words, the coroner says, yes, these large vehicles are 3.4 times more likely to kill pedestrians. Secondly, that in Ontario, for example, 41% of vehicles are SUVs and pickups. But yet they're killing 61% of people. So the coroner said, yeah, we agree with that. A Ministry of Transportation of Ontario was there presenting these numbers, not taking action, but presenting these numbers. The coroner said to us, we agree that this is a big problem. We want you to take the lead on it, and then we'll look at endorsing your recommendations. So what we did then, and in the meantime, we prepared a comprehensive report on the long research that's been in place on this issue. In other words, going back 20 years, we've known that these big vehicles are a problem. And we can say, you know, groups like the auto industry, which has simply built bigger vehicles, and the levels of government, federal and provincial, I wouldn't say they're asleep at the switch, but they've certainly averted their gaze from this problem. I mean, this is a well-known problem. And so in the meantime, we've gotten this vehicle arms race, people arming themselves with these big vehicles, wherein this all of us lose in that. The research that we did, obviously going to from the past to the most recent, which very helpfully sets out the problem as one of vehicle design, specifically the front end. And that's actually a very useful research in the sense that we know this is a design issue. So, and the design is, this is about fashion, not function. So that means the answers to this are also easy answers, because I mean, these vehicles are being sold because they're macho, because they're rugged, and so on. It's not about function. You can replace all of these pickups with equally useful vehicles that are not killing people with the same frequency. as pickups are. So we put out 11 recommendations to every level of government. We know we'll get buy-in, less from some, more from others. At the federal level, we obviously looked at design issues and safety assessments focused on pedestrians and cyclists. At the provincial level, we looked at things like vehicle registration taxes, and at the municipal level at issues such as parking and fleet procurement policies. So, and I'll speak a bit later about a bit more about that.
Thank you very much once more for the little overview and helping both of you, helping us to understand what the kind of organizations that we're involved on is working on and how we're hoping to make a difference. So Albert, I'll follow you up on one of the recommendations. You mentioned additional fees and taxes, both at the municipal and provincial level. We know that's never quite popular with when we speak with a broad public or in politicians naturally that are elected by the same public. But do you think there's an opportunity to talk about sense of internalizing a bit the social costs that are incurred by those larger vehicles into those registration fees or parking fees?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in Ontario, the curious thing is our government has eliminated vehicle registration fees. So we're talking about reintroducing vehicle registration fees, and in other provinces, obviously adjusting them. So there's an obvious way to do that on a sliding scale, begin with, factors that to be looked at to the ones we want taxed the highest. Obviously, those are ones that present the greatest dangers. And given that we're in a climate crisis, also the ones that are have the biggest impact on the climate. So having sliding scale fees makes perfect sense right now, where we try to disincentivize these big, deadly vehicles and incentivize smaller vehicles that have benefits along a range of for a range of reasons.
I'm sure you're familiar. There's an example here in Montreal where we have some parking, sorry, not registration, but vignette, we say in French.
Parking fees, yeah.
Anyway, the right to park on that street or sector. And we have a few neighborhoods that are modulating these fees according either to the weight or the size of the vehicle engine already. But that's still very early on in the most very progressive leaning neighborhoods, I'd say.
Yeah, it's an obvious polluter pays principle, where if you use the most space, pollute the most, and present the greatest danger, you should also pay a higher fee. And of course, we know, and there's some good examples both from the Montreal area and from Paris, that people pay attention to fees. So when they're paying more, and in this case, there's good reason for it, that's a good way to discourage these vehicles from our cities.
Exactly. That's the whole talk and the hope right behind these fees, is that we're able to discourage a bit while internalizing these costs. And Catherine, you've been targeting advertising specifically, so really going at the very source a bit of the thinking, the influence. You've been really framing advertising as a key in the popularity of large SUVs and pickups. But you've made an interesting parallel about tobacco advertising and the automotive one. We know you're coming from perhaps a more ecological preoccupation when framing it, but it still holds up very nicely as an analogy when we talk about the public sector, like the health of everyone, others, both the user and people surrounding you. If you want to expand a bit more on that.
Yes, advertising has a big impact on consumers' choices, and as we see big vehicles in 80 of the automobile advertising, we must think that there is that could be regulated, and it would have a big impact on the choices. In our recent report, we've been able to establish several parallels between the advertising tactics of the tobacco industry, as I said before, and those of the automobile industry. For instance, we put forward values such as in the advertising. I mean, we put forward values such as prestige, freedom, competitiveness and seduction. And there are also contradictory messages with science that are transmitted there, and they are lifestyle ads. And both industries benefit from massive investments in advertising. So these are examples of parallels that we've established. And yeah, considering the impacts of gasoline vehicles on air quality and on safety, and considering all the other health-related issues such as a sedentary lifestyle, yeah, and the impact on air pollution, I've said it. The proliferation of large gasoline vehicles should be considered as a public health issue, and the government should at least regulate automobile advertising in order to reduce consumption and use. And in the report, we explain how it could be done. We recommend to regulate it up to 2030, and then to banish it starting 2030.
Thank you very much for this overview. If people want to read more, I think we have the link in the chat, or if not, on Équiterre website, it should be quite up and foremost on the different activities.
Yeah, it's not yet available in English, but I can send the link in French, and as soon as it's available, you'll see it on the website.
So time exclusivity for French speakers. Sorry about that. Albert, one of your recommendations in your report, you touched a bit on it in your description earlier, is a safe fleet for government. You're at the same time, on one hand, you're basically asking if we can encourage governments, large organizations to promote or prefer the use of vehicles that are safe. But on the other hand, we bring up evidence of the increased risk of these vehicles and don't always meet an opening ear. How can you juggle these this very uneven enthusiasm that we're getting for these reports and recommendations?
Yeah. In terms of cities and governments in general, I mean, lots of these vehicles, so both lots of these large vehicles, and they're not being bought because of a necessity. They're being bought for reasons unknown, I suppose, but they have a lot of them. So to give you the example, and cities, of course, have survived quite well without Silverados and F-150s and Dodge Rams for as long as they've existed. But so, for example, in Toronto, we have the city fleet. There are 955 pickups, and for example, 300 of them are doing parks work. There was an interesting analysis by Matt Elliott, who does a City Hall Watch, where he analyzed what this fleet is being used for. And in the case of these 955 pickups, almost 80% of them were being used for light duty. So, for example, we see these pickups being used in parks, where, of course, there's no danger that you're going to be hit by another pickup, but they're being used in parks to do, grounds work and so on. And what percentage of these trucks were being used for heavy duty? 0%. So what we're trying to encourage, what we want to encourage, or what we are encouraging cities to do, to look at function. What are you actually buying these vehicles for? And that's those vehicles I mentioned, 955 pickups, not even including our transit authority, or including like Toronto Community Housing and so on, and other groups. So we're definitely going to encourage cities across Canada, and of course the province as well, to look at function. What are they really buying these vehicles for? Because not only are they using vehicles that they don't need and paying more, but they're also setting a very poor example for the rest of the community.
Thank you, Albert. And you brought the point that really targeting the cities that can bring meaningful change. At times it's easier and it's more accessible to have a reach at that level of government. That's all the time we had for the panel discussion. So we're going to open up to the public questions. It's not too late if you want to add another question. You just have to use the Q&A tool at the bottom of the screen. First one, we had the, sorry, I should have read it before saying we have a question. We had this mention of what's been happening in the USA, where the I did not read that question properly. Sorry about that. Yes, it's mentioning here on the Streets Blog USA that people who die 30 days after a crash are not included in the statistics and the fatality rates. That doesn't seem to be impeding the fact that those fatalities are rising very quickly on the south side of the border. Do you have any understanding how these victims are tallied up? How it's what the scope of what we include when we talk about the road fatalities? Perhaps more Dominique would have an answer on that, if you're still with us.
Hi, sorry.
No worries.
Yes, sorry, which question are you referencing to? My apologies, Francis.
No worries. I was referring to the question from Sandra Miller about people who die 30 days after a crash that are not included in the system, and wondering how that is tallied up in Canada, if that compares. If you know about that.
No, that's a very good question. I know that our national collision database is across the country, and every province and entity reports to it. I'm not exactly sure personally how, but it's a very good question. I'd be more than happy to have a follow-up and put Sandra in contact with the folks at the Interstat department.
Perfect. Thank you. And I'm assuming also it varies a lot from province per province, since they're usually responsible of how they manage those statistics. But I've been told that in Quebec, it's a similar situation, that after a certain time, they're not included. A question from Laura Edgar. Oh, it says Dominique is already answering that one. Not sure. Do you know of implemented proposed mechanisms to regulate at the municipal level? We touched a bit earlier on the different fees, but is there other mechanisms that you guys are aware that can help manage or discourage the use of heavier vehicles? Albert?
Yeah, I'd say, I mean, it's certainly one of our recommendations that cities need to look at their Vision Zero policies and update them, or road safety policies, for example, to keep these pickups out of school zones or other community safety zones. Many of those powers come from the province, so we're going to have to expand the powers that, for example, Toronto and other cities have to protect the vulnerable road users. And I'd say as well, I mean, as you know, as advocates, many of us have worked long and hard on trying to make city streets safer, and that there's been a lot of investment at the municipal level. So now we're seeing the erosion or washing out of these investments, all of that effort with these larger vehicles. And I think that should really make us very angry, both because of the waste of money and the waste of effort that these larger vehicles are posing in terms of the dangers. So the updating Vision Zero policies, demanding greater powers from the province, and trying to curtail the use of these vehicles in particular areas of cities, if not cities in general, of course, that being the goal.
Right, exactly. I'm seeing a lot of questions regarding more the speed. I'd just like to perhaps reiterate that we're mostly covering the aspect of safe vehicles today, but for sure the severity of crashes is really related to speed in an exponential manner. Most of you have probably already seen the numbers of like a collision below 30 kilometers an hour. You'll have you're most likely to survive, whereas at 50, it's dropping you real fast, and that's not getting better with the size of vehicles. Want to add to that, Albert?
Just to say, I mean, how the issue of speed has played out, because I can tell you our group, we went to the Ontario Chief Coroner in 2012, and one of the recommendations that came out of that was lowering speed limits. And that contributed, that actually happened, not just because of the coroner, others were demanding that as well. But at the time, people said, the response of many politicians was, Well, that's not realistic. I mean, you can't do that. But the public demand for that was so strong that today we see that all across the country is reductions in speed limits, something considered unrealistic. And the same thing we're going to hear now about pickups. Well, what can you do? You know, this is the auto industry, fossil fuel industry. What can you do? But that's why I speak of these alliances and community mobilization is really going to be key to fighting these powerful forces that are allied against us by developing these community and civil society coalitions to fight against these large pickups.
Sure, hard to compete against something that's advertised. I don't know how many times a day on how many platforms that we're getting more and more ingrained to be preoccupied with. Do you want to add something, Anne-Catherine?
Yeah, I would like to add the fact that we often think about what the municipalities could do, but we also we also need to think about what they should not do, like expanding the parking spaces to adapt to the vehicle size is something they shouldn't do. So I think there are some ideas like this that they could just include in their plan in order to discourage the use of these vehicles.
As I was mentioned earlier, municipalities usually have a bit more autonomy and flexibility than the national governments to be able to act swiftly on that, and changes usually stems from them as well before they become national politics. So yeah, I think we have to keep banging at the doors of the municipalities to make some meaningful changes and put the Vision Zero across their mentalities. Had a question about the impact of the bull bars or the race kits. There's often modifications that are used in cars, and those can really change, well, the point of impact. And we saw in the first presentation how dangerous that is, but also the shape of the hood and the elasticity of what the surface is against. Do you guys have anything to say about the dangerous modifications?
Well, only to say, I mean, it's bad to begin with. I mean, the height of these vehicles, we've seen this huge growth in the height of these vehicles. And as I say, this is a selling feature. And so we sometimes speak about consumer demand, but really the companies have done a great job selling these features, convincing people that you're more macho, more rugged, more adventurous if you've got one of these high front ends. I mean, it's absurd. So the other part of that is, I mean, these bull bars and the vehicle modifications simply exacerbate an already bad problem. So if you're another 6 inches off the ground, I mean, you're the visibility of pedestrians in front of you is that much worse. So I think you know that obviously needs to be tackled. That's more of an enforcement issue. Often it's illegal. But let's really focus on the design issues and force governments, because they're responsible for our safety, to take action on this.
Like you mentioned, it's often illegal in many cases, these modifications, but not frequently enforced, let's say. By a question over here. Yeah, we often talk about Vision Zero or even the issues of safe vehicles in thinking in the urban context of like really city streets. But that's also true for the more rural areas outside of the big centers. The safety issues are the same. Do you have any specific analyses perhaps that, or way of convincing people that are not living in city centers that it is a worthwhile issue to investigate or to legislate with?
Yeah, we're certainly see if you go outside of, I know, you know, traveling to smaller towns, the proliferation of these big vehicles is frightening. And it makes you a bit, afraid in terms of what's going to happen next in cities. I mean, the way I look at it, I mean, they're sold as if there's always 5 feet of snow, but we don't even know if these pickups are particularly better in snow. But the bottom line is that pedestrians and cyclists are no less durable. And they're no tougher if they're in the rural areas and then they're hit by these vehicles. And that's what really need to be looking at. Even if you're a minority in terms of pedestrians or cyclists, you have the right to be safe. And for the drivers, I mean, they need to be reminded as well, unless you're secure and taking refuge in the cab of your vehicle all the time with all of your loved ones. I mean, they're going to be at threat as well as soon as you're not in that vehicle. And that's something people need to be reminded of.
It's true that everyone loses in front of a big vehicle. And we didn't touch it too much today, but we also saw a lot of statistics coming that the impact on other drivers as well from these larger vehicles, not just pedestrians and cyclists. Of course, the vulnerable users are much more vulnerable and against that kind of threat. But it's true not just for vulnerable users, but everyone on the road. And just to add quickly on that also, it's not because you're mostly moving by car that you're never on foot or on bike, even if it's just a part of time. We should all be concerned with the safety outside of the car. And Catherine?
And related to that, I wanted to add, I added in the chat, but I wanted to say that according to what Albert said before about the use of the light duty trucks at Équiterre, we did a survey that also showed that people don't use these cars to their full potential, and that they often don't need the vehicles of they don't need vehicles of that size. And about the rural issues, I'd say that sometimes it can be a need when people are in rural areas, but not necessarily. And we have to remember that, for instance, in Quebec, more than 70% of the population live in urban or suburban areas. So we must see the low-hanging fruits and where we could get gains and change things, and not regulate the whole province according to a small portion of the population.
Yeah, and in terms of this, you are better off if you're in a big vehicle and you hit a small vehicle. Now, as soon as the person in the small vehicle realizes that and they get a big vehicle, you no longer have that advantage. So that's where we all lose. So when everyone has the big vehicle, I mean, pedestrians and cyclists were losing already, but when everyone has the big vehicle, you're paying more, you're polluting more, you're making more noise, all of those things. So we're all losing as a community. But right now, I mean, the danger in large part is being offloaded, as Professor Tyndall has put it in his report, onto pedestrians and cyclists or people in the smaller vehicles. So that's why, from a public policy point of view, we require urgent interventions by all levels of government.
I think that's going to be a great closing point to the questions period and the presentation today. Before passing the right to talk to Valérie, thank you for everyone for being here today. I wish we could have had a few other hours to discuss this, but of course, all good things must come to an end. So before you go, Valérie has a few closing words, and it's been a real pleasure to talk to everyone.
Thank you. What an amazing panel. I actually can't believe how much I learned. I'm immersed in this all the time, but safe vehicles is something that's a little bit off of our radar generally. We very much focus on the safe systems approach, as was mentioned earlier. We see a lot of focus on the built environment, on speed reduction and policies. And clearly we have to be looking a little more carefully and be a little more committed to safe vehicles and vehicle design, as well as vehicle speed. And the design that allows for vehicle speed as well, which is another conversation. And I absolutely think we should do another webinar on this. I think we could have kept chatting. There's loads of questions and very thought out questions as well, which speaks to the power of a very good webinar. So I'd like to thank all of you. Dominique, the numbers you presented from 2022 stats of fatalities and the increase is very concerning. We have a lot of work to do, especially if we want to see those numbers come down again. I was quite surprised to see those numbers at the CARS conference last week. So lots of work to do, but I absolutely appreciate everyone's commitment. We will bring back a second webinar, likely in the fall. And I hope some great conversations and partnerships come out of these discussions. So thanks again to everyone and to all of our registrants. Oh, also, if you're on the line, please just take 2 minutes to fill out our survey so that we can continue to improve and bring more webinars to you all. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.